B minus, C plus. But you get credit for still being here because I know it was a long day, a lot of content. We've got a great one that we're going to end with. We've got Dan, we've got Derek, we've got Angela, going to talk about the future of Polkadot. Just a reminder, we do have not quite a full day, but a pretty solid chunk of time allocated tomorrow for our final sessions. And looking forward to seeing everyone at the cocktail hour after this final glorious session. And then tomorrow for day 3, which is going to be entirely here just on the 6th floor. With that, Angie, take it away.
Great.
Have fun.
Thank you so much. So I'm slotting in as moderator, and it's changed on the slide. Peter Mauric, our head of public affairs, has been triple booked and heroically managing all of our schedules. So I'm very excited. I mentioned this to Dan when we were backstage, that if I had to pick 2 people in the Polkadot ecosystem to do this panel with, it would be the 2 of you. So I think what we should do first is just start with some backgrounds. Do you want to start?
Sure thing. So my name's Derek Yu. I'm the CEO of PureStake. We're working on the project called Moonbeam. And just to give the quick kind of blurb on Moonbeam, we are building an Ethereum-like environment, smart contract environment that's a Parachain on Polkadot, so one of the member kind of blockchains that's in the Polkadot network.
Hey everybody, Dan Reecer here. I'm VP of Growth at Acala. Been at Acala since about February. Prior to that, spent a year and a half at Web3 Foundation working on the Polkadot and Kusama launches. Just for a quick background on Acala, we're building a kind of DeFi specialized blockchain or parachain in the Polkadot ecosystem. And we can get into more details on that. And then on the Kusama side, we've built a network called Karura, which is already live and kind of actively building.
Great. And I'm Angie Dalton. I serve as lead advisor to the Web3 Foundation since 2019, pre-Polkadot launch. And my background is really in mass markets tech, so gaming, esports. And I came to the project because I was doing a deep dive for a big media company in LA who wanted me to figure out blockchain and NFTs in gaming. This was in 2018. And I stumbled on Polkadot and was pretty convinced this team can pull it off. So here we are. So I think it would be good to start with what Polkadot is and what it is not. Ryan started off with this with Gav yesterday, but we talk about Polkadot as a layer 0 meta protocol. So can you guys both comment on that?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'll go first. So I guess one way of looking at it that I have is this, that it's kind of like when you hear people talk about different blockchains, sometimes they're asking things like, well, what's the best blockchain? And my one is better because it made this set of trade-offs, or this is the correct way to do things, or this is this is kind of like the way it should be. And it'll I think that questioning, for a Polkadot person, they're going to say like that's the wrong question to be asking, right? I mean the right question is not like it kind of presumes that there's like one blockchain that's somehow this like platonic ideal or gets everything right and is going to be right for everything, and that's, I think, not correct, right? I mean, like the Polkadot point of view is that there's many blockchains, there's many best blockchains, right? It depends on what you're trying to do. It depends on what you want to try to optimize for. And so I think once you kind of think about things in that way, then the Polkadot idea is, well, let's create the tools in the environment where you can create these specialized blockchains, and then let's create like an environment where they can get common security and networking so they can talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, that's kind of like one of the core kind of ideas of Polkadot, is that there's like not one but many, many best chains.
Yeah, I do really like this idea that layer ones, Ethereum, Bitcoin, and both of your chains are focusing on what you are trying to solve and really, a use case versus security and a lot of the tools that you don't have to do in terms of organizing validators, et cetera. So.
Yeah, and just to kind of follow on to both of you, for people in the room, I think many of you might be here if you're just looking to learn more about Polkadot. And I think a lot of people understand, obviously, Ethereum, Bitcoin, and then we're seeing a lot of these layer ones starting to grow pretty rapidly, like the Terras and Solanas and Celos and everyone of the world. But what I think I want you to walk away with today is that, like Derek was saying and Angie were saying, Polkadot is a layer 0 that does ultimately two things when you really boil it down. It secures blockchains, so any parachain like us building in Polkadot, we came here because we want to plug into the existing security validator set of Polkadot instead of having to do all of that on our own. And then number 2, Polkadot connects blockchains together. So there will be up to 100, potentially more someday once we scale, but 100 connected parachains together in one ecosystem. And all of these chains will have native cross-chain ability with each other. So Moonbeam and Acala will have the ability to do cross-chain applications, obviously cross-chain token transfers and things like that. But this is really, I think the fundamental thing to understand with Polkadot is it's just this connected network of blockchains that are ultimately there for the security and the cross-chain. And of course, we could go on about several other topics as well.
Yeah, it might be good now just to dive into securing a slot in a parachain auction. Can you talk about the very basics of how that works? You know, we've seen it on Kusama so far, the Canary network, but it'd be good to hear both of your perspectives in terms of your experience.
Start with it. So, yeah, as you all probably know, Polkadot was built by Gavin Wood, and he most likely took some learnings away from the ICO phase of Ethereum, where a lot of people were kind of burned and teams were able to raise money pretty easily and launch trustlessly on Ethereum, just launching a token. One thing that I think him and the team at Web3 Foundation took away from that is that when we're launching parachains on Polkadot, we need to make the bar a little bit higher, make it a little bit more of an effort to launch these blockchains so that we can help protect people in our communities. So because of that, Moonbeam and Acala and any chain that wants to launch on Polkadot in a slot on the network to get that security has to go through this thing called a parachain slot auction. So there's an auction where parachain teams are actually bidding to win one of these slots on Polkadot in order to kind of earn the right to launch. And this is an auction just like you'd see for a house or a car. We all know what an auction is, but when you bid in a traditional auction, you're bidding out of your own pocket. You might have $1,000 that you come to the auction and hope you win the auction. In the Polkadot case, you can actually bid in 2 ways. If you have a lot of DOT, you can bid on your own with your own kind of stockpile of DOT as a team if you think you can win with that. But the second and more common option is to do something called a crowd loan. It is what it sounds like. It's a loan from a huge crowd of people, most likely 20,000 plus people, where those people are actually contributing DOT, loaning that DOT to us or to Moonbeam as a team in support of their auction. And then when we get that DOT, we can then go on and use that as our bid in the auction. So we get the power of the crowd instead of just a single account. And why would you do that as an individual? Because as a contributor, you know going into it that there's going to be a ratio of a token from that team, so say ACA, given for every DOT. So maybe it's 1 to 10. When I contribute my DOT, I'm just agreeing that that will be locked, trustlessly, not touched by the team. And then in return, I would be issued the native token of that project. And then after 2 years, which is the duration of that slot that the parachain wins, then all of the DOT that I contributed in the loan, which is why it's called a loan, because I get all of that DOT back. So the only thing you're really sacrificing as a contributor is the staking returns that you would have earned on that DOT, because you do have to unstake the DOT in order to contribute. So this is a process that we've already done once on Kusama, Polkadot's experimental network. And this is probably the biggest event to watch for in Polkadot in the coming months, because this is how Moonbeam and Acala will need, what Moonbeam and Acala will need to do in order to launch.
Yeah. No, well put. And you know, the thing I'll just add a little bit that the thing I think that's interesting back to these points of what the motivations were for coming up with this model. It is the case that you have to continue to demonstrate your value, basically, right? So, these slots that you're bidding on, it may last, a year, possibly in the maximum case, maybe 2 years, but then you have to renew. So it's not the case that you kind of, you clear this bar once and then it's like free sailing from there. You have to keep showing your value, and it might be the case over time that project becomes less valuable, right? Or it's stops executing or stops shipping, in which case then they'll be probably unlikely to continue to occupy a slot, and their slot will be given up to another team that can make better use of it.
I really like that concept that you have to continue to prove your worth to the community and get community buy-in by bringing people back to the table at the end of that lease. So, so we all get the "is this an Ethereum killer" question, and it came up yesterday with Gav, and he said no, it's not, and he pointed to Moonbeam and said actually there are Moonbeam is out there bringing apps into the ecosystem, and so it'd be great to hear kind of what is this multi-chain application, how does it work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I kind of mentioned that, obviously the idea that we had was to basically implement something as close as we could make it to Ethereum, but on Polkadot. And so I guess the first question is, well, why even bother doing that? Like, why do that? And, I think it's really born of kind of practicality. From, my background, we kind of background building just regular Web 2 companies where, if you look, the Ethereum dev tool set, infrastructure, a lot of these things are just the most mature tools that are in this space right now, and it's the technologies that most developers know already. So there's just like a lot of practicality in kind of providing a way for developers to use those tools to express themselves, on Polkadot. So that's definitely part of it. But back to this ETH killer point, I think it does tie back into the idea we talked about when we started, which is that I think that ETH killer narrative is born of the same mindset of there's going to be like one, right? There's like one that's correct. There's one that's going to win. Like it's a kind of zero-sum game. All spoils go to the winner, and that's. I mean, I just think I just look at what's happening in the market now. I think it's pretty hard to kind of maintain that position. It's increasingly hard to maintain that position now, right? We see many chains that are quite successful have like communities, have ecosystems, have development activity on them. I only see that like continuing, and there's a huge demand for block space in general, right? So for high quality kind of team and product, I just continue to see things evolving further into this kind of multi-chain environment.
Yep. I think that we should maybe, before we move on to kind of broader topics, just on the Kusama Parachain. The Kusama is the canary network with it's not a test net, it's actually real value at stake. So we've both learned a lot, I think, in this process. How do you think the Polkadot Parachain auctions will be different, or how will this evolve?
So Kusama, the whole point of Kusama really is to allow teams to, first of all, build products on testnet, move them to Kusama, and experiment in a real value network. Kusama right now is, I think, between 2 and 3 billion, depending on the market. So it's very much so a real mainnet. But the whole purpose of it is to provide an environment for us to build before we move that product or feature to Polkadot. But what I've actually, on the marketing side, what I've experienced is that it doesn't only help developers, it's actually helping me a ton with preparing for Polkadot. Because we had to do this crowd loan on Kusama, and it's an unbelievable amount of work on all of us. But what we're able to do is understand how to get the community kind of educated around the whole process, building out the actual UI and the experience that users go through to contribute the KSM or the DOT, and then going through the whole process of distribution and launching this phased launch rollout that both Acala and Moonbeam did. So for me, we had some key takeaways, of course, and some small things that we might change, but for the most part, it just kind of helped me refine the strategy and the way we execute on Polkadot. I guess one of the big things we learned is that there's just a lot of, you need to focus a lot on the users and support and education. So we ended up hiring someone for that. We got a lot of good processes built around that, and we'll definitely be using that for the Polkadot auctions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd maybe add just some comments on Kusama itself. So obviously on the same page with Dan, like it's a real value environment where we could cut our teeth, where we learned a bunch. But I kind of feel like this original idea, while it's still the case, is evolving. Right, these things, once you launch them, kind of take on a life of their own, and the future is determined by the stakeholders, the token holders of the network. And what's seeming increasingly clear to to me at least is that this is its own network, right? It doesn't want to be kind of always second fiddle to to Polkadot. And we're seeing teams that are targeting Kusama as their final deployment destination. They're like, no, that's where I want to be. I don't even want to go to Polkadot. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where you can start with one idea, but I think that these things have their own will in a way, right? Their own collective will. And so I'm starting to kind of think of it as there's just two networks here, basically. There's two networks, and we're finding that kind of the same comment I made before, that the demand for block spaces is quite high. So there's gonna it's going to be filled with interesting use cases no matter what.
Yeah, yeah. What do you see as the biggest hurdles for getting parachains to the masses? That I was pretty excited yesterday when Gav said, we won't have wallets. We'll be able to easily kind of integrate or onboard the masses. And like I said, I came at this from a mass market perspective, spending a lot of time with gaming companies, and most of them are kind of confused about how they could actually onboard tens of millions of players or users. How do you think this will happen?
Yeah, I think a good example that I can talk to is a company actually based in New York called Current. Current.com is a traditional fintech company who actually started out as a crypto native company after the two founders, or the CEO and the CTO, left Morgan Stanley, tried to build on Ripple, and then eventually asked themselves, how do we get crypto in the hands of millions of people? Actually, this exact question. And their answer to themselves was, let's not build in crypto, let's build in fintech, get the millions of customers there, and then bring crypto to them some years later. So now fast forward 6-7 years, Current and Acala just, I think it was 2 or 3 months ago, announced that we're going to be building an integration with them to essentially provide a DeFi backend to generate yield for their current savings account customers. So they've got about 3 million customers in the US. And just to make it very concrete, imagine one day the customer is opening up their account. They've got $200 in their savings account, but then there's a pop-up that says, hey, would you like to sign up for this yield account from Current? Say, for example, it's 3% or 4%. The user accepts and says, yes, let's sign up for this account. What actually happens in the background is those customer funds are going to flow through an on-off ramp into the Acala dollar, our stablecoin, and then into this yield engine that we're building. So this yield is generated from dot staking, which fluctuates from 12 to 15%. We got a grant from Compound, so we're building a bridge to the Compound gateway, which is another substrate-based chain, and other various kind of forms of yield. But then when that yield is being generated on a periodic basis, say it's daily, weekly, monthly, that will be liquidated back to the Acala dollar, sent back through the on-off ramp into US dollars, and then distributed to the customer's accounts. The customer does not even need to interact with DeFi, doesn't even really necessarily need to know that there's DeFi involved. These common people, or the general masses, don't really care about anything besides what percent am I earning. I'm earning 3-4% instead of 0.5%. And then, of course, in the background, Acala's network is operating that kind of process. So this is one use case that's coming for us that I'm really excited about, because this is, I think, how we get crypto into the hands of millions. It's basically just by not forcing them to interact with these tools that aren't quite there yet in terms of UI and UX.
No, I think I largely agree there that the UX just in general is still probably the biggest barrier for mass adoption. This is definitely clear when you're coming from just a regular Web 2 world that I'm always explaining to people that, at my last company, we had maybe a third of the product team was devoted to UX design, design research, these kinds of things, are not usually priorities in a lot of crypto projects. So I think that I would agree that, UX is important, but I do think that a lot of that is just additional investment needed, right? So I mean, you can still make there's still better and worse, when it comes to UX, even for a Web3 native product. So that's kind of my hope, is that just people just invest more in that, right? They just kind of take it as seriously as the computer scientists and the cryptographers that they're hiring. That you should value a great UX person is just as valuable.
I was going to ask, what is the largest problem we will have solved 5 years from now? Do you think it's UI UX, or?
I mean, I think it's, it's a big barrier to broader adoption. Now, on the other hand, I think that, you have highly motivated users in the Web3 space. So they'll put up with a lot, basically, right? I think so. That's, that's a benefit.
Maybe not out 5 years, but what challenges will we overcome in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think if I just think about, how I think more broadly about things, and this kind of ties a little bit into, I think some of the motivation for why, we've chosen to build in the Polkadot ecosystem, that, it kind of ties into this multi-chain idea where, I mean, for me, probably the most interesting use cases on Polkadot are kind of infrastructural. I mean, I think these chains tend to have an infrastructural look and feel. You're still dealing with, fairly low level things. But, what I see happening is, you already see it starting to happen, is that there's different teams that are providing different infrastructure services on Polkadot. So it could be us providing a generic, smart contract, almost like a compute capability. It could be someone providing storage capability. It could be someone providing an identity service. So those services, I'm quite interested in those because, kind of the vision that I have is that it's kind of like, when you're a developer, you go to AWS, right? You go to AWS, you have this menu of different options, different kind of building blocks you can use, right? You have a message queuing service, an identity service, a database service. And what I think is going to happen in Web3 is that, as it evolves, you're going to get these specialized services that are going to evolve, these specialized infrastructure services. And then, the idea would be that, you can kind of, as a developer, you're going to build an application which will span multiple specialized blockchains, right?
Yep.
And so you'll kind of have this AWS-like experience, but it'll be all Web3 services. And so my best bet is that Polkadot's a place where that's going to happen because of this toolkit that allows you to build specialized services combined with the networking element to let them work together. So that's kind of this tendency towards increasing specialization, but then being able to combine those specialized services. You get a whole is greater than the sum of its parts, kind of idea. And so that's probably the thing that that's the thing I'm most interested in, and that's what I think is we're going to see kind of happen as things play out.
Before you go, I want to ask Derek one more question, because I spent a lot of time thinking about NFTs, and I would love to hear, and I know you have some experience here too. How do you see interoperability kind of eventually happening with NFTs? Because right now it feels like rights management, there are a lot of challenges there.
Yeah, I mean, well, to start with, this kind of multi-chain idea, you even see that now, I would say, right? So a very typical application these days for NFTs is that you might have, the actual NFT itself might be on, something like ETH Mainnet or Polygon, but the metadata might be on something like Arweave, right? Storage optimized chain. So that's the same kind of idea where you're combining these two different chains that each have their own specialization, but kind of combining them into one application. Now, I think in the case when you have two separate chains like that, it actually kind of works against the UX in a way, because you kind of the integration's happening client side, so you're kind of almost making the user understand these different systems. So I think that's that's where a system that has this built-in networking like Polkadot, I think it has some opportunities to hide some of that complexity behind, and that's going to be important for kind of making that that clean UX. But to your question of NFTs, yeah, I think they're more difficult to move if you're just talking about movement versus fungible tokens. You always have these questions of, what to do with metadata, the provenance has to be tracked usually. So then there's all this kind of extra data that has to be tracked, and then you kind of start facing questions too about what the creator either wants or doesn't want, whether you're going to honor those wishes or not, kind of thing. So there definitely is more complexity, but I see teams are tackling these problems. So I'm quite confident that there's going to be movement like there is with fungible tokens now for NFTs.
Yeah, that will be a good place when we get there, because it's a challenge. So I'd love to hear your perspective. Next 5 years, what's the biggest challenge?
I was going to just expand on Derek's comments around customization, and in terms of a problem I think we'll see solved, or at least improved, is kind of the developer building experience. So just to kind of talk about the Polkadot SDK or substrate, which is the kind of blockchain development framework that we use to build these blockchains. One, I think, underappreciated aspect of this is that we can continue building these modules. You can think of Substrate as kind of like a menu of pieces or components within a blockchain that you might drag and drop in a very simplistic way into your blockchain. But these components, these palettes, can actually continue to be built and essentially injected into your chain without a fork, with a simple upgrade. So just to put that into perspective, obviously to upgrade Ethereum creates an entire fork, and it's a huge headache. With Polkadot itself and any parachain can be upgraded without a fork. So Polkadot since launch, it's been launched for I think a little over a year, is upgraded, last time I checked, about 25 times. These are 25 upgrades that would have caused other networks to hard fork. So if you can just imagine what that means in terms of almost future-proofing the chain and allowing us to continue to build new palettes, new components that can be just seamlessly upgraded into our chain. So for us, it's exciting, and also for Moonbeam, because when we have these developers building in our EVM, the developers, if you're in the Ethereum space, you kind of get what you signed up for with Ethereum, and you can't really change it. We're going to be able to take in requirements from the developers building on the Acala platform and actually build new requirements or build these features into the chain itself and upgrade the chain and give the developers essentially a new blockchain that they can build on without even having to move. So we'll continue to be able to upgrade our chain as well as Polkadot over time, which is, I think, is pretty fascinating and exciting.
Yeah,
That's great.
Totally agree with that upgradability. I mean, we just launched like our Kusama like Parachain called Moon River not even a month ago, and I think there's been like 5 runtime upgrades like already, and like 4 client upgrades. So yeah, I think that it's this adaptability to the market is something, and as new information is being made available, that is like a big competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to ask you both about the blockchain trilemma. The trade-offs between security, scalability, decentralization. And one thing that I was really excited about with Polkadot is this idea that the layer 0 kind of abstracts security away from that. And I'd love to hear there was actually a great image I mentioned earlier in an Arrington research report that I just saw. It was really good. But I wanted to ask you guys, in practice, is that what's happening?
Why don't I just chime in first quickly? I know that you will have comments too, but I would say that this kind of idea that as a parachain you kind of get security as a service from the relay chain is unique, basically. So if you were kind of launching your own standalone chain, the trick with that is that you usually have to kind of bootstrap the security around it, and that's like easier said than done, right? So in the early days of the network, you might have some smaller set of validators. There's not a lot of economic value like in the system yet, so you're quite like vulnerable. I think that's something that Polkadot solves via this idea of being able to kind of rent the security, if you will, right? So as a parachain, you're kind of getting a slice of the security from like the relay chain, where validators in the relay chain are kind of swooping in and kind of validating like blocks that are being created by each parachain. So that's like a very elegant way to solve this bootstrapping problem, where you kind of come in from day 0 like with the full like weight of the Polkadot relay chain, like providing security.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I guess going back to one of the first questions of like why even build on Polkadot, and why did Acala choose to build in this ecosystem? That's one of the main reasons, is that, of course, we get the cross-chain ability, Substrate, but not having to bootstrap our own set of validators is one of the biggest reasons why we have decided to build in this ecosystem and go for this Parachain slot auction, go through all that effort in order to get that security. So I think that's about, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was excited to hear maybe a little Easter egg of what might be coming in terms of the 1,000 validators going to even more validators, and the scalability potentially of the relay chain that's coming. So that's really good to hear. So last words. We have about a minute. It looks like a minute and 20 left. Do each of you want to give kind of last words on your project?
Sure. I mean, I can just comment on kind of the thing. I mean, for me, of all the different good reasons why people are building on Polkadot, for me, it's this like networking is like the key thing. This ability for different blockchains to interact with each other. I think what you find in the Polkadot ecosystem is you know, it feels like you're all part of the same system. And I do think it's going to be a non-zero-sum game where as different teams like Acala and Moonbeam interact and integrate with each other, you know, we're going to create like, you know, more like rich scenarios, more value like together than like apart. So, you know, that I think is probably the most interesting like, you know, part for me of this. And, you know, that's where we're focusing a lot of our energy basically, you know, moving forward. We're focused on integrations like with, you know, other teams. And obviously there's simple things like token movement scenarios, but, you know, there's also much more advanced things like remote like control of, you know, smart contract or other kinds of functions like on other chains to create these like multi-chain, natively multi-chain applications we talked about, so.
Dan?
Yeah, I think last thing from me, we explained how Parachain auctions work. In the Polkadot ecosystem, I think this is the event to watch for. This should be coming hopefully soon. We don't know exactly when, but I know Acala and Moonbeam are both going to be having crowd loans open, and this is really the next kind of phase is working our way into launch and then bootstrapping, getting users, getting applications going. So really appreciate everyone taking the time to come kind of at the end of the day and learn more about Polkadot. So as you do learn more about these Parachain auctions, one thing that I would ask is be an advocate and be an ambassador for Polkadot and help us educate on all this stuff because it's really complex. I know when I started understanding it, it kind of blew my mind, and I think a lot of you in the room might be able to relate to that feeling with Polkadot. So I would appreciate any help kind of advocating for all of our work.
Thank you both. To drinks.
Thanks, everybody.
To drinks. Thank you, guys.